I'm feeling it. You know, it's tense up here. I'm feeling tense. It just, I can feel it.
Oh my god, my flashlight went off. Oh my god, my flashlight's blinking.
Who's down here with me? I got chills all over my body right now. Holy Whatever this negative energy is, push me! Push me down these steps!
Good evening, everyone. Steve here with Ghost-Addicts podcast. Tonight we'll have myself, we'll have Ryan Zacherl, and Dave Gear. Unfortunately, Jason McKinney could not be with us tonight. He is down home with his family. We're going to be going over one of the most foundational forms of evidence that people gather while they're out researching the paranormal, and that is EVP.
That is absolutely right, Steve, and this evening we are going to be discussing EVP in depth, from the history all the way down to ways that they can be captured, and some of the EVP that we've captured personally on our investigations and on the Paranormal Quest episodes. And we wanted to thank everybody that follows us on Facebook, because over on Facebook we posted a poll on what actual topic we would be covering for this episode of the Ghost-Addicts podcast. So if you are not following us on Facebook, please go over and follow Paranormal Quest on Facebook. That is facebook.com/Our Paranormal Quest. If you like that page, we will be posting polls weekly as to the topic of discussion on this podcast, along with allowing you to leave comments underneath of questions that you would like us to answer. So please do that, and we will get right into this podcast. So, Dave.
Yes?
Tell everyone, you've been investigating the longest out of the three of us, even. You've been investigating for almost 20 years of your life. Kind of give people an idea of what an EVP is, and maybe even talk a little bit about your experience with recording EVP.
Sure, yeah. EVP, or electronic voice phenomena, is just basically using the most rudimentary thing, which is your digital voice recorder, if you will, and setting down your digital voice recorder and trying to communicate with those who have passed on. And if you happen to be so lucky to get a response, then that would be your EVP.
And it's a very interesting phenomena, like Dave had described, setting down your digital recorder and recording, asking questions, and then the whole idea, the basis behind these electronic voice phenomena is you will play back this recording, which assumedly you were the only person talking, or you have a good record of who was talking and asking questions. And then within the white noise of this recording, you will pick up voices that were not there when you had originally been there in the moment. And if it is an intelligent response, which they are not always intelligent responses, that's important to point out. If it is an intelligent response, then you will be able to have your questions that you asked be answered, which can be assumed that it would be spirits or people who have passed on answering those questions through the white noise static on the recording. Now, this is not something that is new. This phenomena has been around for quite some time. The history of EVP can be traced back all the way to the 19th century and into the 20th century. In fact, one of the earliest advocates of EVP recording was a man that you all may have heard of. A little man by the name of Thomas Edison believed that if spirits could communicate with the living, that the sensitivities of the recording microphone on these devices should be able to be influenced and pick up the voices or the messages from the dead. So I think that's pretty cool that Thomas Edison, one of the most brilliant minds of that time, was talking about EVP recording and using these devices to communicate with the dead.
Man, that's amazing. It just goes to show you that some of the most brilliant minds are some of the most open minds. Like, you have to think a lot of times outside the box, rather than, what's right out there that you can physically see in front of you. You know what I mean? That people that think open-mindedly are, willing to go out on a limb and create a theory, that those who passed on can really still communicate with us.
Absolutely.
And I definitely think that Thomas Edison would fall under that category. We had an experience investigating in a location where Thomas Edison was very prominent, in the Gill House. So which people believe they've come into contact with Thomas Edison's spirit there at the Gill House. So which is in Galion, Ohio. It's a really beautiful location. But we not only had the experience of that, but we got to test out what is referred to as a routive diode. Jason couldn't be here with us today, but Konstantin Routive was a Latvian psychologist, and he had this theory by creating these diodes, which only recorded at a certain frequency, and that would remove all background noise and would allow these spirits to come through more clearly and allow them to come through without interference, which it was really interesting to listen to Jason talk about that. If you've not seen that, go on our YouTube page. You can watch the episode from the Bel Air house to see us test this routive diode and to see Jason explain it in depth as to how that device works. But it's also interesting that very brilliant psychologists and very brilliant scientists were manipulating these devices and these microphones, so to speak, to try and more accurately and adequately capture these spirit voices on recording. And Konstantin Routive dedicated a lot of his time and energy to try and capture EVP on these devices.
Yeah, just going to add that in. Another thing that they could actually do is if they head over to our YouTube page, Paranormal Quest, and they can actually check out our investigation of the Gill House.
Absolutely. The Gill House was a very rich location for EVPs in general. We captured a good many EVP there up in the attic, and also had an experience with a disembodied voice whenever we were on the first floor stairwell. So, which is a huge thing to note. That's something that everybody needs to remember. There is a difference between EVP and AVP.
What exactly is AVP, Ryan?
AVP is auditory voice phenomena, and the difference is that with electronic voice phenomena, you can't hear it with your ears. It's just picked up on an electronic device, like a digital recorder. With AVP, you absolutely can hear it. It is auditory to your ears. And I'll never forget us standing on the stairwell at the Gill House and hearing what sounded like a voice coming from the bottom of the stairs, saying hello. And I remember we even had, I ran around the house looking for possible sources to see if anybody that was on the first floor, because the owner of the house had requested that that there be someone from the location on site while we investigated. And I ran around asking her if she said hello. She said she did not. And that was a pretty cool experience, not only with the EVP we captured in the attic, but with the AVP that presented itself.
Yeah, I mean, we even had, I recall at least one or two times we had physical touch involved in that investigation. The Gill House, it's safe to say, is probably one of the more active places we've been to.
But the Gill House is a really cool investigation, a really cool location, and it relied a lot on just using digital recorders for communication with EVP and AVP. We had other locations that we relied very heavily on ITC research devices, or instrumental transcommunication devices, which is kind of a spin off of the EVP, your standard EVP session, just using other devices.
But what it still comes down to, in order for those to be foundational, if you will, it still takes a digital voice recorder to record what they convey to us.
Absolutely. You have to be able to capture those voices that are coming through on those devices, no matter what device you're actually using. But this kind of has stemmed many different devices, such as your Spirit Box. Many people have used other radios to create these, like the Hack Shack or the Ghost Box radio. And what that essentially is it uses a radio that is made to sweep through radio frequencies to find a usable station, and it is a manipulation of that device so that it does not stop when it finds a frequency, and to allow it to continue sweeping, to create a constant steady sweep rate that is supposedly able to carry the voices of spirits or capture the voices of spirits, or they're able to talk through that sweep rate. As to how reliable this device actually is, I don't think anyone has been able to prove that it can be 100% accurate all the time, but it is something interesting to test, and we've done that on investigations. So, but that is another form of EVP, so to speak, because it is an electronic voice, and it is certainly a very strange phenomena when you can have intelligent voices come out of this device, out of this box, and answer your questions. So for right now, we're going to take some of our Facebook questions. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Our Paranormal Quest. We'll make posts that you can comment on and ask us questions, and we will answer them here on this podcast. So what kind of questions do you have over there, Dave?
All right. Okay, so the first one that we have here is from Mr. Stephen Young, and he says, this is mostly about EVPs in general. Why don't spirits tell us much, and why do they commonly say things that don't seem to make any sense? Also, they commonly say help or help me, and I've never quite understood how one would begin to help them. Are these spirits that may not understand that they've passed on?
I think it comes down to there's basically two different forms. There's intelligent response, and then there's the residual energy theory or response, if you will. I think maybe because like with some of the EVPs we get that don't make sense, we're hearing fragments of a conversation that's just potentially repeating itself.
Right.
And then you have the intelligent response where they're literally trying to respond to the question that was asked of them.
Sure. So like, and with the rest of his question, how would we begin to help them, for the ones that are saying help? Because we've actually gotten that a couple times ourselves.
There's one particular time from my experience with dealing with EVP and just a spirit in general. It's just trying to collect what evidence you can get from the entity itself, whether it be EVP or if you going old school and using any type of dowsing, anything like that. Is just try to gather what you can, and in this one particular time I'm talking about is with Annie, from that's in my museum, and what it came down to right off the bat, I didn't know what she wanted. I know she was trying to make communication with me. Her energy would pull me towards her portrait, and after a couple years, what it came down to is just someone going out to her gravesite and paying respects, and she was lonely, and that's what it was with her. And I think
Right.
potentially, not with all obviously, but with a lot of the entities that we or you, the listener, come in contact with, they're lonely. And you got to think, especially with older grave sites and different things like that, older hauntings, if you will, very rarely, do they have any family living, let alone in the same area or in the vicinity of where they're at, or where they're maybe, tied to in a way that'll acknowledge them. I mean, that's got to be a pretty lonely existence.
I would have to agree with that.
I think it's also very important to point out that if the theory behind spirit communication and EVP is actually true, that it requires a certain amount of energy for these spirits to be able to communicate, and maybe that energy is limited. And maybe to answer Stephen Young's question on Facebook, when he asked why is it that they always seem to have such a short response, it is probably, if the theory is true, because of a limited energy source, a limited amount of energy. There's only a certain number of words that they're able to get out over this device on EVP, and so they have to pick and choose their words wisely, and what you get in the end is just a single word that doesn't really make much sense, because human speech is very, very... there's a lot of intricacies to human speech, and to be able to speak in detail, you kind of have to be able to use multiple words to explain yourself, and maybe the energy to do that just is not there. So, which is something that I've always been fascinated by. There's certain people that capture full sentences on EVPs, which we've had the opportunity to do maybe once or twice in our full almost 10 years of investigating together. And then most of the time it is just one words, two word. But then there's also some people that claim that they're able to capture full sentences almost every time that they perform an EVP session. So it's very interesting to look at that and to study that. But yeah, we really appreciate that question, Stephen, and it is a very interesting topic to think about, a very interesting thing to discuss. Why are the words so short? Why is it that they often don't make much sense in the grand scheme of things? And I think that's partially why we do what we do as investigators, to be able to understand that better and to be able to understand these EVP and how they are captured and how they work a little bit more.
Now, we do actually have another question here from Mr. Stephen Young. He says, for my other question, have you ever made contact with a spirit through EVP that you believe didn't know that they had passed on? If so, how can you really tell? Could this be a reason for angry spirits that many believe to be hauntings? He goes on to say, if someone else was living in my house and I didn't know I had passed on, I would be angry as well.
I mean, I think common sense, for people who are alive, you would assume you would already know that you've passed on. But everyone living, everyone that's on our side of the veil right now living, we haven't died yet. We haven't crossed over to that point. So
I think a lot of our EVPs that we have captured, though, are of somebody who, didn't know that they had passed on because of the context of it. And, with some of the ones that we're going to play later on, you'll be able to comprehend, why you would take it in that context.
Right. Absolutely, I agree. It's just a tough question. It's a tough question to answer, really.
I guess to answer that in a way that I would kind of make sense of it, death is a very ambiguous thing, and so there's not a lot that is known about it. As much as there is to speak for as far as consciousness goes, I don't know how consciously aware we are of our own existence, our own living or dead existence, and what the difference between the two are. So I'm not really sure. As Dave had mentioned, we seem to capture a lot of voices who speak as though they believe they're still alive, or speak as though they have some sort of living consciousness in that moment. And, whether they know or not that they are no longer in the same existence as we are, I can't speak for. I'm not entirely sure of. But I agree with that statement that this could be one of the reasons for the anger. It could be some of the reason for the frustration, because to not be aware of how you're existing would be a very frustrating existence, and it would certainly cause a lot of animosity, at least for me. So very, very well said. But moving on from that, one thing I wanted to talk about really quickly is with a lot of these EVP that you see and hear on a lot of the TV shows, a lot of the web series, you really have to take that with a grain of salt. A lot of it can be made up. A lot of these devices that are out there are knowingly, like we had made a video before on the DR60. People know that is a device that is recording itself but sounds like an EVP. And to, beguile a whole audience of people on something like that, I just think is not fair. And I just take it with a grain of salt when you are seeing and hearing things like that. And I know one thing that we have always prided ourselves in is uploading what we believe to be 100% authentic. And, we're not trying to, as they say, pull the wool over somebody's eyes and give you something that isn't actually true just to get views and notoriety out of it.
First of all, if you haven't investigated and you're curious of how potentially to get an EVP and stuff like that, go out and do it and research yourself. You don't have to watch these videos and take their word for it, so on and so forth, or even taking our word for it. go out, research for yourself, and try to answer your own questions.
Yeah.
And you'll find out in the paranormal field, 99% of the time, there's nothing but theories.
Absolutely. You know, like you said, go to a retail store, a big box store, get you a cheap recorder. You can get one for like $20.
And make sure they have a USB port.
Yeah.
Some of them don't.
and go out and go to a cemetery or go to an empty building that you might have access to, or even in your apartment, and, you know, take your own approach to it.
Well, I absolutely agree with that. The only way to find out and discover more behind these theories is to actually do it yourself and investigate. And to kind of go back what you were saying with the situation that we had pointed out on our YouTube page with the DR60, the Panasonic RR-DR60, was that people were capturing the sound that the recorder generated internally. It was a malfunction in the recorder, and now these recorders are sold on eBay for $1,200 to $1,500 a piece because they believe it captures a spirit every single time, when in reality all it captures is the internal workings, the internal mechanics of the recorder that is then generated, and then they have matrixing or Pareidolia, as it's called, and people's minds manufacture the sentences that they believe are being captured on this recording. Now, it is very important for us to point out, being serious paranormal researchers, that is one of the common critiques of EVP in general, is that it is just Pareidolia, which is that phenomenon where your mind creates something out of chaos, creating these sentences and words. But I will also say that some of the recordings, some of the EVPs that we've captured, there's no Pareidolia about it. There is Class A, meaning the highest quality, intelligent responses on these recorders, that it's not your mind playing tricks on you creating a word. That is the actual word that's being said. As clear as you can hear my voice right now, that's how clear these recordings are, these EVP that we've captured.
And they were very intelligent.
And while we've captured some of the clearest EVPs, that there's no question that it is a voice responding to us intelligently, there are also what sounds to be like a jumbled, gargled mess that is picked up on some recorders that very well could be the Pareidolia. And it's very important to point that out and to say that you have to have a lot of discretion. You have to use discretion when you're reviewing these EVPs before you go claiming that what it says is actually, or what you hear rather, is actually what it says. And as Dave had mentioned, you'll find that a lot on the on television shows, and a lot of other investigators will do that. They'll release EVPs with an exact transcript of what they believe it says, when it really sounds like just a garbled electronic noise mess that you can't really decipher. So, but that is half the problem and half the challenge with EVP evidence review.
And another thing with that is, you know, a percentage of the time it is the person themselves, you know, who's doing the EVP and asking the questions, where they begin to, and I myself am guilty of it as well. Just, you get so comfortable with the situation that you're in that you start whispering, and that just doesn't make for good EVP.
I think a lot of investigators that end up whispering like that, you know, even the most veteran of investigators or researchers, if you will, I think in some cases with that, they're worried about, because with some of the locations you're in, let's say hypothetically we're in the penitentiary here or down in Moundsville, you're worried about your voice echoing, you know, down hallways and through cell blocks and stuff like that. So you end up whispering, but you don't realize when you're whispering, and you're going to be going back over the material when you're going through editing, you know, you didn't mark it. It was like you're thinking, was that me, or was that potentially a response, you know, from a spirit? So
yeah, absolutely. And I know we've gotten to the point where we can tell which one of us it is whispering and talking. But I mean, it goes back to what we were saying. Go out and do it yourself. It's good to have a nice firm voice and speak loudly, and try not to whisper like this really close to the microphone, because you never know. It could end up sounding like something, but it's really not. It's just yourself whispering.
was that a response? Did you hear that, Ryan?
I did. I think that was paranormal.
And it was paranormal.
Oh, so it wasn't Dave just whispering into the microphone.
No, I'm using a nice, solid, firm voice.
As a solid and experienced paranormal investigator should.
It's a Class A. Class A.
But I also wanted to mention that, as Dave had said, experience is everything, and going out and doing it and reviewing your own audio is very important as an investigator, because you will pick up on things that as you listen to it more and more, you'll pick up on things that you wouldn't have before. I remember Jason had told us a story of he had someone that he used to investigate with who would kind of grunt or clear their throat, and every time they did that, they did it so unconsciously that they didn't even realize they were doing it. And when they listened back, every single time they would think it was a growl on their recorder. And because it was so unconscious to them, they'd been doing it for so many years that it didn't even register in their brain that they were clearing their throat in that manner. So it's important to do, and it's an important exercise as an investigator to work with, because if you are going to efficiently capture EVPs, you're going to want to know your own sounds, your own grunts and garbles, and so you can be able to more efficiently pick out what is paranormal and what is just you, like cracking knuckles, movement, shuffling of feet on a floor. These are all things that you need to be able to decipher very well, and over the years that we've been investigating together, I think we've all become very proficient at that. One thing that always blows my mind about you, Dave, is if I've reviewed a piece of audio and there's a voice in there and I can't tell whether it's one of us, I know that if I present that to you, even at the lowest of volumes, if it is one of us, you'll be able to identify who it is and more than likely what we're saying. You'll say, "Oh, well, that was Steve," or "Oh, that was Jason," and I think that's a very, very important skill set to have as an investigator.
Yeah, you definitely want to know who you're with, and if you're investigating with Bob White, know Bob White and everything that Bob White does and all of his attributes. If you're investigating down by a lake, you gotta realize that Bob is gonna make these clicking sounds or something like that because he gets nervous by the water. So know everything that Bob White does.
Or when Bob is down there by the water, that he might stir up some bullfrogs, and that's not a growl on your recorder, it's just a bullfrog being intimidated by Bob White.
True. So, but I mean, yeah, just know who you're with, and get to know them very well.
And we apologize to anybody out there, any investigators who are in fact named Bob White. That was just the generic name we came up with. We're not specifically talking about you, Bob.
Right, yeah.
But I think it'd be an interesting exercise for us, and it would help some people that are listening as investigators in a way to hear some of the things that we've captured over the years, and to kind of go through some of our most memorable...
Do you want to pull some of them up?
Absolutely. I think we should pull some of them up, and I think we should go through them.
Steve, I don't know, which one stands out to you? What do you think?
Well, I'm going to go all the way back to when we started our very first episode.
Ooh, yeah.
The one called Rebel Yell, and we were up in one of the bedrooms in the Maxwell mansion down in Clarksburg, West Virginia. Basically, leading into that experience, we were shooting the breeze about Civil War activity that went on there in the Clarksburg area before we really even went into the location. That's pretty important in comparison to the actual evidence that we captured there up in that bedroom. What started off as a AVP, an auditory voice phenomenon, or what many people call a disembodied voice, turned into one of, from my opinion, one of our best EVPs, electronic voice phenomenon.
Before you go any further, Steve, I wanted to point out, as far as the history goes with the Maxwell Mansion, that the land that the mansion now sits on actually used to be occupied by a cabin that was built by Stonewall Jackson's grandfather. That is the legendary Civil War Confederate General Stonewall Jackson. His grandfather built a house on that property, which was eventually demolished, and then during the Civil War as well, that land was used as a camp. There were tents set up there where Confederate soldiers actually camped for a number of months there in Clarksburg, right there on that property. So I think that's important as well as history to lead into this AVP, this disembodied voice that we heard and captured.
Right on. It was pretty amazing. I think you and Dave heard it. I was on the other side of the room. I was actually sitting next to one of the windows looking down at the street. I think a car had just driven by, and I was making a point of that for the EVP recording. And you guys actually startled me. And I think at first you guys thought it said shut the door or something like that.
Something along those lines. Yeah, it was very quick.
And that was actually not even upon listening to the recording. That was on just after you had heard it more clearly than we did, Dave. And that was what you had thought you had heard somebody say in the moment. And then when we played it back, we realized it said something entirely different.
Yeah, as I recall, you guys had listened to the recording a couple times on the actual digital voice recorder, and kept basically, you guys thought it was something about shutting the door of some sorts, and then I forget, it was either you or Dave asked me to listen to it, and when I heard it from the very first time, to me it sounded like we lost the war.
Yeah.
And there was definitely like a southern accent to a southern drawl to that statement.
Yeah, I remember hearing it aloud, and I thought, that was probably just somebody down on the street. But like you said, you were actually looking out the window at that time, and there was nobody out there.
Absolutely, and it really is a relevant response if you think about the history of that particular location of the Maxwell Mansion and its ties in Clarksburg, West Virginia, back to the Civil War. But we're going to talk about what we think of this recording a little bit more in a second, but first we want you to hear this, so take a listen to it right now.
Yeah, just every time I hear that, it just, it gives me goosebumps and takes me right back to when we very first started doing this.
Yeah, and it makes you really think, they're listening even when we think that they're not. You know what I mean? We were outside. We were out in the backyard in that area. I think probably shooting B-roll of some sorts. It was still daylight out when we were talking about the history, involved, like the Civil War history involving, tied to that area. So it's pretty amazing.
Incredible.
Absolutely, and you're right, that does take you immediately back to that moment, to when we first started investigating with Paranormal Quest back in, that was 2010, I believe, so that would have been about 8 years ago now. And,
yeah.
And if you go back and you watch that episode, you're going to see a huge evolution with Paranormal Quest.
Oh, yeah.
Because when we started out back then, we were young. We had a passion for filmmaking, but we weren't necessarily the best at it, to say the least. We weren't, and that's why Dave's laughing. We were dedicated to it, but we weren't that good at it. So you can see a huge difference. If you were to watch the Maxwell Mansion episode called Rebel Yell, and then jump all the way forward to the Revenant Acres Farm episode and watch that, it's like a night and day difference. It's almost like it doesn't even look like the same people made those videos.
Just like going to school,
Great memories.
Oh yeah.
It's like a time capsule.
Absolutely, but listen to this one more time. We're going to play it for you again. We lost the war.
So Dave, what would another one be that really
oh boy,
sticks out for us here for PQ?
That is a good question. Let me think. Probably from the good old West Virginia Penitentiary. Do you guys remember one of the very first riot nights that we did with one of my old friends? I won't speak their name, but we were all up in the infirmary, and we were filming, and all throughout the night we had been using dowsing rods, and we were asking questions, and it was basically what it was doing. It was trying to separate us.
Yeah.
and single us out and
That and get us to turn the lights out a lot.
get us
When
to
it's
turn the
real
lights out, get into the darkest part of the prison, and not have any lights on. Well, we eventually ended up in the infirmary, and she ended up asking the question, "Are you following me?" And I remember when we watched it back, we were doing the evidence review, you could hear a response, and it just says, "We wouldn't do that." And even just saying that gives me cold chills because it was such an intelligent, clear response.
In addition to that, it was a female voice, and it definitely had a very manipulative, very, just to me, a non-positive vibe to it.
Oh yeah, and the tone was very odd.
Yeah, it almost seemed as though it was facetious or being sarcastic when it said it, like that.
Oh, yeah.
We wouldn't do that.
Right.
It had that inflection to it that we wouldn't do that. And I think that was what made it that much more creepy. I mean, we'll let you guys decide for yourselves because it really is absolutely creepy.
Just like you said, Dave, it gives me chills hearing that.
Oh yeah. It's I mean, I want to say one of a kind. I guess they're all one of a kind, but that one it just definitely stands out, like you said, female, and whether that is, the entity, trying to mock a female, or whether it was a female, maybe a nurse, but I don't recall any nurses that ever passed away there. They did have female inmates at one point, but
it had the vibe to it from my opinion on it. Just like it was not what it was presenting itself to be.
Sure,
it
yeah.
was very, very just bone chilling.
Oh yeah,
and
absolutely.
you had that one experience to boot where you were contemplating on not investigating again after that.
Yeah, that was the same night.
Same area, right across the hallway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I agree with everything you guys just said. That whole night was charged with a very malicious energy, and I think that EVP is a really good reflection of that. How it seems to almost be mocking her in the question that she asked. Are you following me? We wouldn't do that. It was just, and like Steve said, and like you said, Dave, absolutely chilling. And I don't think we'll ever get chills like you get whenever you hear it for the first time. When you're listening back to these EVPs and you first hear it and discover that piece of evidence, that is absolutely the biggest adrenaline rush, and you get the chills on chills on chills. But still, years later, almost 9 years later, it's been about 8.5 years since we captured that EVP, and the fact that it still gives us chills is a testament to the quality that it actually holds.
Yeah, because again, it goes back to knowing who was around you, and that that's nobody's voice who is there, and that just makes it even more chilling.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, again, listen to this one more time too, because I think it's very much needed. It's worth it for sure. Take a listen to it and let us know what you think. Wow. Again, like we said, crazy. But this isn't the only EVP that we've captured that seems to be a little bit malicious of intentions.
Yeah.
We've captured a few of those, and interestingly enough, earlier we talked about an AVP that we captured, or we heard, rather, didn't capture it because our camera wasn't on, but we heard an AVP at the Gill House in Galion, Ohio. Now, that was also an investigation that was charged with a lot of electronic voice phenomenon as well. We always do what is called an abandonment tactic, which was spawned by an investigation that we will talk about here in just a little bit. It's another EVP we want to bring up for you guys, but this one was also captured on an abandonment tactic investigation at the Gill House. Now, the recorder that we had, the recorder in question, was placed up in the attic of the Gill House, which is a beautiful home in Galion, Ohio, designed by Lewis Camper, built for the Gill family, and was even visited by Thomas Edison multiple times in its heyday. and has a lot of history, but people seem to find it to be a hotbed for paranormal activity. I mean,
Maybe that's because Edison believed in it.
maybe.
Yeah. To say how ironic, one of the more active locations we've been to, at one time accommodated, safe to say, maybe one of the forefathers of paranormal research.
Very true.
I mean, that is probably one of the best points there, Steve, because Thomas Edison is believed to be one of the first advocates for EVP, and the fact that we captured an EVP in a house where Thomas Edison was said to actually visit quite frequently, it's really cool.
Absolutely.
And it's safe to say, who knows, he may have conducted one or more seances there.
He could have.
In order to make communication or to prove his point. Maybe it's even, going out on a limb, maybe he used that location to prove his point of spirit communication.
Absolutely. Now, but like I'd said, we were doing an EVP session up in the attic during our abandonment tactic, which is where we take all of our equipment, set it up, including digital recorders, and then we leave. Now, it was really important that we had established communication, or we had begun talking to the house or the spirits of the house beforehand. And we set up the recorder in the attic, and while we were gone, it picked up two separate voices, both of them pretty vague, but they seemed pretty angry, pretty malicious.
They did. Yeah, it was definitely had a different vibe to it than some of the other things that we've gotten in the past.
It did, and I remember listening back to that recorder's audio and actually hearing those two for the first time. Now, I will warn any younger audiences, these EVPs, we believe they actually contain profane words, and while we do not condone profanity in any way, we don't believe anybody should speak profane words.
We do not.
Which, you probably can tell that's probably a lie from if you've watched any of our episodes for the amount of times I have to censor us in each one of these episodes.
I was just thinking, Ryan, there's a lot of bleeps in some of our episodes.
Yeah, I just thought that they are not going to buy this one bit. But anyway, just to warn you, there is some profanity within these EVPs in case anyone is offended by it. We are not meant... We don't mean to offend anybody is what I'm trying to say.
Sure, viewer discretion is advised.
So, what we believe these EVP are actually saying, the first one, it sounds like it says bitch. But that is what we believe this EVP actually said, and you can listen to it, you can hear it. I mean, take a listen for yourselves. That's what we think it says. I mean, you can decide for yourself, and let us know in the comment section below whether you think this is actually what it is saying. So,
take a listen. Definitely creepy.
Yeah, you can definitely hear the anger and the intent in the voice. But it was the second EVP that we captured right afterwards that I think is probably a little bit more malicious. It seems to have a little bit more
aggression
in the voice, and I think it again, what we hear seems to be profanity, so we will warn you in advance. Now, there's a couple different interpretations that we've come up with for this, and we want your opinion on it. When you listen to it, put it in the comment section on what you think it says. But this voice, we think it either says, do it quick, which is an interpretation that we've kind of strayed away from. We now, after having listened to it a few times over the past few years, believe that it says, do it, you fuck. Take a listen for yourselves in the comment section. Let us know what you think it says. We think it's the second, but decide for yourself.
Another very, very, like you said, very aggressive, very threatening tone with that one.
Yeah, and the more I listen to that, the more and more I actually think that it is the latter, that it definitely says, do it, you fuck.
I mean, it could have been angry with us, or it just could have been something residual.
True, yeah.
But the next thing I think we really should discuss, we have two more that I think we've listed
that
we think are worthy of bringing up on this podcast. One of them was a pretty intelligent EVP that actually said the name of one of the best friends of Paranormal Quest. All of us have become very close to this man. He's come on multiple investigations with us, and he is a really good investigator. While he can get to be a little scared at times, he has proven himself a very talented and skilled investigator when it comes to capturing evidence. But he came with you and I, Dave, because Steve was unavailable to actually come on this investigation. On Halloween night, he came with us to the J.C. Thompson building.
Yeah. Andrew is very much, I believe, a magnet for paranormal activity because he's very... While he is very good at what he does, he's very amateur at what he does, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that as in, like, still very new to it. And I think with that, he's very unfiltered and doesn't block anything out. And I think a lot of the times that might be sensed, and that is why I speak of the devil, he just text messaged me. That's very, very weird. Yeah, I lost my train of thought. That kind of creeped me out a little bit. He has a very good aura about him, and he has
very positive.
Very positive, very good energy, and I think that gets picked up, and I think that's why a lot of things happen when he's around.
Absolutely, I definitely agree with you with that statement, Dave. With the few times I've got to investigate with him, it's like the normal energy that we three had originally, now four that Jason's with us. When Andrew investigates with us, it's a correlating energy. We already, as PQ-wise, the four of us have an amazing synergy, from my opinion. And when Andrew investigates with us, it's just there's nothing, there's no glitch to it.
Sure, yeah.
It fits right in, just like another cog in the system, for PQ.
But it's interesting because the J.C. Thompson building was a location that was kind of hard to come by. We actually came across it because I was in my final year of film school, and I needed a documentary, and I was making an interview-based documentary on haunted locations, and I needed one more to make the three that I needed to make this documentary. And that documentary is actually on our YouTube page. It's called the Encounters documentary if you wanted to watch that. But that is a school project that I did for my final year, my senior year, for the documentary class. It's kind of like a thesis film in a way for the documentary class. But I stumbled upon this house on the internet as I was looking for haunted places near Pittsburgh. And it was just this little building on the corner of the downtown area in East Liverpool, Ohio, and had a lot of history when it came back to the mob. And it's believed that Pretty Boy Floyd, one of the most famous gangsters in American history, frequented that when it was a speakeasy, and that the upper floors of it at one time were a brothel, were a very popular brothel for that age, and at the time was some of the most high-end, expensive prostitutes in the city of East Liverpool. So there's been a lot of activity seen and witnessed by a lot of the people that have investigated there, and a lot of them say that on the upper floors they experience a lot of activity from what seem to be female entities, what they believe to be the spirits of some of the prostitutes that would have worked up there in the J.C. Thompson building when that was an active brothel. In the basement it seems more of like a party vibe, but also a very gangster type of no-nonsense business attitude down there. So, but we were upstairs on the floor where the brothel came about, and I remember specifically Andrew was feeling the energy. I mean, what do you remember, Dave? I know Andrew was pretty well freaked out by the place.
He was, no pun intended, very spooked. So yeah, we were up there filming, and the camera battery died. So Ryan opted to go downstairs, grab a new battery, and Andrew looked over my shoulder, and he started freaking out, started screaming, and as you can hear and see in the episode, and he saw a woman standing there, and I tried to get him to just, calm down a little bit and wait for Ryan to get back up with the battery and we could start filming, but Andrew, being Andrew, was not having that. He kind of went into panic mode because he genuinely knew that what he saw was real, and I believed him. And so he started yelling out for Ryan because he knew I was not going anywhere, because that's just the type of person I am. And Ryan, what do you remember from then?
Well, I remember because I was downstairs just grabbing the battery, and I remember I had just picked the battery up off the charger whenever I heard him on the floor above. I mean, screaming. I heard him screaming your name. I heard him screaming my name, and I thought, oh, something bad just happened. So I ran up the stairs, and when I got up there, I found him in a state of panic. I found you trying to, console him in this state of panic.
Right.
And there was nothing really that I could do either to calm him down. We just turned on the camera and we just asked him what he saw, and he described it. You can hear it in the episode when he describes it. He talks about how it looked like a woman and that she had a long Victorian dress, but only part of her was visible, and that it looked like she was forming. Now, all of this is really interesting, but it's not the topic of conversation. We're not here to talk about apparitions or visible manifestations. We're here to talk about EVP. And if you've seen that episode, you will know that we caught an EVP when that happened.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't even known to us until we went downstairs, and we were just kind of poking fun at him. We were listening back to the recording, making fun of him for screaming. We just kept playing it over and over again and laughing at him in general for having that freak out. And then I remember you listened to it one more time, and you did your infamous Dave, which, I mean, can you do it for the audience whenever you hear something that's creepy?
Guys?
Yeah, that's our cue that something really awesome just happened.
So every time Dave does that, we know, okay, something serious is on here. So I went over and I grabbed the recorder from him, and he told me, listen to this, you have to hear this. And we played it back, and sure enough, there was an EVP on there. We had to amplify it, but once it was amplified, it was clear. And it was just before he looked over and saw this female apparition standing in the doorway looking at him. We actually caught a female voice saying his name. It sounds like a woman says, Andrew. And, I mean, just thinking about it, it gave me chills in the moment. It gives me chills every time I talk about it.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was a very intelligent voice, and it was right before he saw that apparition. And not only to mention that, there were only 3 people in the building that night. Myself, Dave, and Andrew. There were no women there.
We were locked in. We were the only 3 in there. We were locked in.
Yeah, we were locked into the building. So, yeah, it was really cool. Take a listen to this, and we'll amplify it so you can hear the voice. But it is clear. It says his name. It says Andrew. And then he looks over and he sees the apparition.
I'm so cold. I'm so cold. Dave, no, I gotta go. I just saw a woman.
Wait,
No,
stay here with me.
No, Dave.
That is it's just phenomenal. And just to hear Andrew freaking out like that just gets me rolling every time, just because I know normally how comical he is, and to see him in such a serious light to me makes me think it's comical. So
Just makes me wish even more so that I was there to experience that with you guys, and with him especially, because when something from the other side of the veil mentions your name, and it hits close to home.
oh yeah.
It is a life-changing experience. You will never be the same after that. And Andrew doesn't get to go with us hardly at all, but when he does, it's always a memorable experience. And I really wish I could have been there to experience that with him.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, you talk about, like you'd said, Dave, Andrew can be comical at times, and to have him freak out and be so serious, I think, was probably one of the most comical things about that. That's actually how we discovered the EVP, is we were playing it back, making fun of how he was screaming.
Yeah.
So every time we hear him in that moment screaming and yelling like he was, it kind of makes you crack up a bit. But props to Andrew, and he was downstairs whenever we actually discovered that. We were downstairs on the first floor taking a break after that whole endeavor took place, and you discovered the voice, and he broke down crying when he heard it.
He did, yeah.
I remember he couldn't even hold back his tears. He was, and it wasn't tears of happiness or tears of sadness. He was genuinely afraid. I remember
Yeah.
that was what was even more, I guess, comical about it was that it was genuine tears of fear.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what I respect about him and about you guys. You know, just PQ in general. You know, when it comes down to it, if there's an experience we have that's full of that much passion, that much energy, you know, there's no holding that back. You know, you gotta. That's living. You know, that's living life, and that's an experience that speaks to not only the individual that it's targeted at per se, but also the people that they share their friendship, they share their happiness with. You know, and I think it's just one of the greatest feelings in the world.
Absolutely. Now, moving on to the last EVP that we are going to bring up and play for you as an example. This is probably the most
Intelligent.
the most dramatic, the clearest EVP, the most audible. When you, phenomenal.
Yeah.
When you talk about audible, meaning when you listen to it on the recorder, it wasn't an AVP, it was an EVP. But it was also during one of our abandonment sessions. Dave, kind of, what was this like for you? What was this investigation like? And
Well, to be honest, it was awful. Mainly because, but I mean, in retrospect, it was great because it formulated one of, it formulated the what we call the abandonment technique, which has proven to be one of the greatest things about our episodes, in my opinion. But just the investigation itself was awful. You know, we were asked to come there. We did show up, and then I guess the homeowner or whoever had the bright idea to invite more of their friends over. So it was like, I think it ended up being, 15 of us in the house all at once, and it was supposed to just be the 3 of us at the time and one of the owners.
Yeah, it was chaos. Initially, the phone call, or it was either a phone call, no, it was a message I got on Facebook. Chris Deadman had contacted me. How he got my name, I'm not sure. He asked if we, Paranormal Quest, could do a preliminary investigation of this location. And above anybody, I was embarrassed because from the information he gave to me, and it was supposed to be Paranormal Quest and like 1 or 2 of the family to be at the location.
Right.
And I know he was irate because when I got a hold of him after it was all said and done, I said, yeah, these 8 or 9 ladies showed up in addition. He's like, well, who authorized that? I said, your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah.
But like you said, Dave, because of a horrible, chain of events of the extra people being there, it led again to one of the most effective techniques we use while we're investigating.
Yeah, it ended up being a calamity, and I remember we've gotten to the point to where we can just give each other a look, and we all understand the look, and the look that we gave each other was like, really, this is really happening right now. So I remember we kind of sidestepped and talked about, well, let's just see if we can get to set up our recorders and the cameras and stuff while we were gone, or set all that stuff up, and then go for a walk around the block and just let them, tell them that we needed to get out of the house for a while because there was too much going on. And
that was the only way
it was
going to work to get them all out of the house.
yeah, and we absolutely had to set up an environment that was conducive to capturing paranormal evidence, and the only way to do that was to get some silence in some form or fashion. And the only way to get some silence was to just get everybody out of the house, to say, you know what, let's set up all of our equipment, cameras, recorders, whatever we have, and let's just get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
Let's just go down the block.
Which I think is pretty much what I ended up yelling at people, because I think it was one of the few times on an investigation that I was really, really irritated.
Yeah.
and I finally goes, everyone just get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
And I surprised myself. It wasn't a very proud moment for me during investigation, but like,
Yeah, it ended up being a little more than we bargained for. But I mean,
We wanted to make sure whenever we left the house, though, that we stayed within full plain sight of the house to make sure that there wasn't any contamination, to make sure that nobody walked up to the front doors or messed with anything. We even had some cameras that were covering the entrance area. We had a DVR camera set up on a tripod directly in front of the door, so if anybody opened up that door, that would actually knock the camera over, and so nobody could physically get into the house.
There was only 2 ways in, 2 ways out, front door and the back door.
yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, and there was absolutely no way that anybody was going to get into that house without us knowing in some form or fashion, and that's what I think makes this EVP that we captured that much more compelling.
And one other thing I want to set up before we play this is the area that we were in, the house kind of sat there by itself, and what we did is we walked probably about a block and a half, maybe 2 blocks down the street, and we still ended up having a full view of the house, so we knew that nobody was going in or out of the house.
But you could see pretty much the back door from where we were sitting at all times. And,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, that just makes what we're about to show you even more credible, because it's just,
It was so clear.
yeah, I don't even have words for it still.
I'll never forget that as we were getting ready to leave, I walked through with the setting up the recorders, and I just said, if there's anybody in the house that has a message for us, this is the only chance that you're going to get to give that message to us, and that you're going to have to say it here while we're gone, and that we'll hear you later. That was the biggest thing that I said. We'll hear you later. If you have a message to tell us, tell it to us now, and we'll hear it later.
Absolutely.
And that's where the intelligence came from in this EVP, because we left, and whenever I played this back, I remember sitting in front of my laptop, and I had just gotten done reviewing the majority of it. Now I skipped past the first few minutes because I knew we were leaving at that point, but I actually skipped a minute too far when I started listening to it, and I was getting ready to delete the clip when I was like, you know what, let me just go back and listen for evidence in the portion where we're setting stuff up. We had just set up everything. You hear the owner laugh as she shuts the door, and it was not even a minute. It was maybe a minute, and it was probably a minute and 10 seconds or so after we walked out that door, and that door was locked and shut.
And you can hear it click pretty much. You can hear the tumbler click in the door.
Absolutely. And we walked immediately away from the house, out the back door and down the block. So it wasn't like we were, hanging out around the house, loitering around the house, talking. We were out of the house and down the block within 15, 20 seconds after that door was shut and locked.
And when you hear the EVP, you can definitely tell that it's within the house.
Yeah.
It's within the house. It's not muffled from the outside. It is in the house.
But we'll let you take a listen to this now and see if you can pick up these voices. And I don't think you'll have a problem because they are very loud and very clear.
It's amazing. God, I want to go back.
Yeah.
I wanna
yeah.
go back.
Me too. I think one of the most outstanding things about that is like Steve said, you can tell it's inside the house because you can kind of hear the acoustics of it, like bouncing off of the wood, because there was the stairs and there were wooden,
And the floors were.
and the floors were wooden, and you can the acoustics in there were perfect for something like this, and I just thought it was incredible that you could hear that in the clip.
Again, it's just that that EVP for me, and I'm not trying to be biased by any means, but it's one of the most clear, most profound EVPs that I've personally heard.
Oh,
At
yeah.
least was there to partially and or 100% experience.
I agree. Yeah, it definitely still sends chills up my spine.
And it was just this amazing, profound EVP. And we'll let you listen to it one more time here. Take a listen to it again, and let us know what you think in the comments.
it's just so cool that you can. To me, I always felt it was mother and daughter, and I think you can pick up on that very clearly.
Yeah. The younger girl was so codependent
Mm-hmm.
on the adult female entity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that inquisitive nature of the tell them what? It just, which is very, very intelligent to what I was saying as I was getting ready to leave, as we were all getting ready to walk out of the house, but that's what I was saying to them. If you have a message for us, tell us now, because this is when we're going to have a chance to get it. And then it's not even, just a minute or so after we walked out the door, having that inquisitive nature and hearing, and having this child ask, tell them what? And then to have the mother communicate back and say, we don't do that. And it's very interesting because after that point in the night, we didn't catch anything else.
No.
We went back a second time to that house, I remember, when it was just the three of us.
With nothing.
Nothing. We didn't catch anything. It was almost as though they had been coached, or they were coaching one another not to give us any evidence. Don't talk to them.
Sure.
That we don't do that. We don't talk to them, which was really unique and really cool.
And if you think of it, they didn't know us from Adam. You know what I mean? And that's what you would expect in my opinion, a protective parent to tell a child. We don't do that. You don't know them. They could be not nice people.
That right there is probably, that rounds off the list there as the best I think we've ever captured.
Yeah.
And but all of those are pretty unique and pretty interesting, and like we said, the easiest way to capture EVPs and the easiest way to become proficient at capturing EVPs is to go out, buy a digital recorder, and just start doing it. That's the only way you're going to actually capture them.
Trial and error.
Absolutely.
So, we feel like that since we're coming close to the end of our time here, we should probably wrap this up. But we wanted to again thank you all for tuning in and feeding your addiction with the Ghost-Addicts podcast.
Absolutely.
This is why we do this. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like us on Facebook, facebook.com/Our Paranormal Quest. Please share this podcast with all your friends so they can listen to it. Please subscribe so that you can get updated on all of this. And we also have a Patreon page in which you can sign up to become a patron of us and to help us by pledging a little bit every month to help us fund this, because we spend a lot of our own personal money to bring this content to all of you, and so that you can enjoy these videos and see the evidence that we capture. So over on Patreon, it's Paranormal Quest on Patreon. You can become a patron of our quest and all of our different content that we create.
Absolutely.
And we enjoy this. Remember, once you're on that Facebook page, make a post on there or comment underneath one of our posts. Remember, next week, what would you like to hear us talk about? And we have two options here for you for next week that we are going to present to you right now. And we will post the comment. We'll make the post as soon as we post this podcast. And you can go over and comment to get you amped and excited for next week. So, Dave, go ahead and lay those two options on them. Tell them what they can choose from for next week's podcast.
All right. Well, this week, we kind of asked between EVP and the West Virginia State Penitentiary. You guys wanted EVP. So I think for next week, we're going to recycle the West Virginia Penitentiary. Or we could discuss the difference between residual energy and intelligent energy. So let us know in the comments down below or over on the Facebook poll.
And we will accumulate all of those suggestions, all those votes, and we will bring you a different topic next week out of those two there. So
you guys get to choose.
Absolutely. We want to make this as interactive as possible. And we will eventually start bringing in guests on this, because we just started this. We are not technologically equipped to have a guest stop in or have a guest call in and have us to be able to record them. We're in the process of setting that up, but be very aware that once we get that set up, we're going to be having guests come in to chime in and talk with us on these various subjects. So stay posted for that. Follow us on Facebook. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Find us on Patreon. Follow us on Twitter, just PQ Reality, and on Instagram, Paranormal_Quest, to stay updated on everything that we are doing. And
thank you for feeding your paranormal addiction.